Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a weekly podcast where we figure out what we think about everything in the world. My name's Michael Forrest and I am London bound.
And I'm Ivanka Majic, and I'm not London bound.
Not anymore. Today we're going to talk about, today we're going to be two Gen Xers. We're both Gen Xers, right?
I don't know, apparently I'm an honorary Gen Z, somebody told me once.
Well, that seems... okay, well, we can introspect that a little bit more. Is my face freezing on the stream or just on my external monitor? We're going to talk about, like, Zoomers and Millennials and Boomers and that sort of thing. And just, because I've got this thing where it seems like a lot of the stuff we've banged our heads against and tried to get our head around on this podcast is sort of, like, obvious to the Zoomers. And they're sort of like, yeah, and it's like they're not having to like get anyone to understand it. They're just like, okay, let's, like they're acting on it, I think, or trying to act on it in a way that perhaps is harder for us old folks. So I wonder what the implications of that are. And yeah, okay, so it looks like it is my external screen. Oh no, it is buffering. Any thoughts? Do you know what? So Gen Z is a Zoomer, right? So you are an honorary Zoomer, according to this person.
Well, according to Sarah, who'd wrote an article about it. I think mostly because her perception of me is a sort of gobby activisty type person, even in a work environment. But yes, I think some of these labels are a bit like. I don't know.
It's quite loose, I suppose.
They're quite loose. They're more. It's interesting to unpack the attitudes. I also wonder what effect it has if we, as a sort of parental type generation, are actively thinking about things. Then perhaps it's not so ridiculous to think that the generations that are younger than us would accept them as truth, or accept them as fact. Yeah. I certainly know that all my friends, in nursery, where we're all teaching the children to be kind and to share, and kind is a very important word when raising children at the moment, certainly in the circles that I operate in. So I think it's a natural progression of those words. Perhaps we didn't have, we had politeness and asked to leave the table, and like different kind of things that were pushed onto us.
Yeah,
that maybe we are breeding these Zoomers.
Hopefully that is the case. Sometimes you wonder how that can be happening given the conflicts, the crazy media environment. But let's cut to titles and continue this after a little thing. So, what's the best thing that's happened this week? Launched any awards results?
Oh yeah, I did actually. I wasn't going to say that. Okay. But yes, we announced the winners of the Brighton Restaurant Awards vote online. The Bravos had this year we did it entirely digital, so we didn't give out any. Normally we go out and we give out about 70,000 cards for venues to distribute, but we didn't this year. We went very digital because we were umming and ahhing about whether or not to do it right to the last second because of Omicron and what have you. So instead of taking our usual 2 months to plan it, we sort of planned and executed in about 3 weeks. But we did it, and we had lots of votes, and we had 16 winners, and it was met with much positivity when we announced the winners on Tuesday. So we had like 30,000 page views to the site, and then another 15, 20 the next day. People get very excited about it, which is nice. But obviously it takes a lot of making web pages at dawn to make sure everything's in place. And then of course we only had 2 miseries. What, you announced me as best roast and then you've used a picture of one of my burgers. It's like, shut up. Couldn't you just email and said, thank you so much for putting me on your website. Here's a lovely picture of my roast you might like to use. But, people, only a couple of those, but mostly
People,
lots of lovely, happy people. One lady we phoned, she won. There's a place in Brighton called Smalls Hummus, and Sarah, who runs Smalls Hummus, is a very lovely person, and they won the Eat Well for Less category, and she got all teary because she's like, this is exactly what we try to do. We try to produce really good quality food at affordable and accessible prices, and she was absolutely delighted, and that frankly made my day.
Good.
And her video of her and her team accepting their trophy was very nice, made you all smiley.
So you did like video acceptance. They sent a video, or you didn't do like a live stream or anything like that?
No, God, no.
Not this time.
We've never done that. We've never done an event, and we've never done a live stream because we can barely pull off asynchronous. It takes a lot of organising, a lot.
To do the text.
To do the text. So we did. We sent somebody out with a phone and some wooden trophies. What about you, Michael?
Sounds good. The best thing that happened to me this week was I brought my Roomba in. It's got it out of the back of the cupboard, and now my studio is getting robot vacuumed every day, and it's just nice to come in and the floor's freshly vacuumed.
Nice.
So that's good. And also I set up my teleprompter, so I am looking through my screen into the camera lens and you and the viewer's eyes as we talk. Wow. And it's feeling pretty good, although sometimes it's freezing, and I'm a bit worried that is coming onto the stream, but I don't think it is. I think it's just my monitoring. So yeah, I'm having a fine week. It's been fine. It's been good. There's been some honey cake. There's been some banana chips, and that is my existence. So there we go. Just a lot of and I'm using my new tool, BeatSheet, to run this podcast because I got a bit overwhelmed by doing 2 podcasts back to back that need some planning, and now it's going to be so slick. So I'm just going to press next, and we're going to go into the break. Given the sort of like culture war, blah, 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 it would be easy to think that the children were a toxic cesspool of polarized nonsense. But actually it seems like they're doing all right. And how much of that is coming from us as the older generation, and how much of that is just coming from their more available information diet? Like they're able to, we grew up in a time where there wasn't all that much data around for us. There was a lot of hearsay. There was maybe a book. There was maybe going to the library. But like these young children, they've got everything. Jesus Christ. I'm just going to mute Ivanka for a second there. Oh, no. Oh, you've muted. Are you controlling your mute? Okay. We've got this. This is episode 199 of Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, and we are tired. How much of it's coming from the curiosity and the availability of Wikipedia and the availability of fact checking and the availability of YouTube videos where you can learn things in a very clear. Because my vision for the future was always like children could learn things on their own terms with a sort of highly engaging sort of video style, AI style teaching. And I think even without the sort of highly personalized side of it, I think they're just, even though misinformation is rampant, I think there's enough information that it is putting them in a sort of more powerful position than we ever were in, like at a young age. Am I crazy?
You're not crazy, but there's drilling.
Yeah.
This is interesting. I was listening to a Guilty Feminist recently, not some a podcast that we used to reference often, but have stopped recently. I think, or don't reference so much recently. There's a young woman on there who goes into schools and talks about young woman. I mean, a 19-year-old who gets involved and is campaigning for better sex education in schools, specifically, and she.
Better. I'll interject while they're drilling and say I saw actually the best Onion headline I've seen in a long time was Texas bans consensual sex. All right. I can't hear you.
The Florida's banning the use of the word gay. Anyway, the point of this young woman campaigner, she organises sex education in schools, and one of the things she was saying is like you can't stop children finding stuff out anymore.
Yeah.
It's impossible. There is no way you know what they're looking at on YouTube. There is no way you can control their access. So, and I think that has positive and negative effects for sure. Like you get young women like her who's 19 and understands that looking at porn is not a way to learn about sex. And then there are people that are just looking at porn and going, that's now normal, and having their self-esteem eroded. So I think there's certainly, there are undoubtedly some correlations between availability of information, the format that it comes in, and how it's consumed. But there's also a lot more shit out there, and there is a lot more access to stuff. And I don't know how I'd like to believe as well that perhaps as humanity becomes better educated, like maybe these generations, these Zoomers, are the beneficiaries of more education than we've ever had in human history. Then they're also their ability to go, well, that sounds like bullshit, is also evolved.
So, Annette, apparently we're not trying not to swear anymore on this podcast. My apologies. I suppose sorry, bullshit Annette. Is sometimes the only word. And then I've tripped myself up by saying that. I think that even the fact that I think they're being taught about like the thinking errors and stuff in the classroom, the sort of like, appeal to authority, confirmation bias, all those kinds of things that really we just weren't prepared for how the exploitation that the media would and data companies would start bringing to the table to make our lives more difficult, to make to attract us to these things. But yeah, there's definitely an aspect where, yes, the kind of information that propagates is not necessarily the best information. But is there enough actual good information to sort of ultimately, is there a net benefit? I feel like it's not crazy to be optimistic that perhaps the net benefit is good, is positive.
I think so, but I still think that it has something to do with like the numbers of people going to university, the numbers of people, like all of these numbers are higher. They are like the how we, again, looking at somebody like Gapminder videos and the guy that ran Hans Rosling and his legacy, that we are that I don't think it's just about the informal education data.
Okay.
I think there has to be a correlation, especially now that I'm not living in Brighton.
Yeah.
I see a slightly different world. I don't have exactly the same media. I'm not. Some things I find much more disappointing, and some things I find more positive, because I'm living in a different society, one that is very young, very very young. Like I watched. Slight tangent, I suppose, but I watched a BBC Monty Don doing Gardens of the Adriatic, and it came to Croatia, and his conclusion was basically that the Croats don't have gardens; they grow food in their garden.
Right.
And a garden is somewhere that you use to grow food, and he attributed that to poverty and communism. But I think to understand the Balkans, you have to go 2,000 years into history. This country, this surface, this geographic area has never had peace. It's never been unoccupied by an external force. So you've got people like, when we're talking about being a progressive in the West, where we have higher standards of living, when we have good education, I think it's a natural consequences of not being under attack. Whereas we've got a long way to go in other parts of the world. We're still defending our bags of grain and making sure nobody nicks them.
Tricky.
And it's a bit.
Okay, I think I am. Sorry, short breaks. We're on a bit of a schedule today. I think I do have a sort of. I think when I talk about this stuff, I do have a bit of a sort of anti-educational establishment bias, because I was so disappointed with my supposedly best physics education at university. I was very nonplussed by the state of higher education when I was younger, but and the fact that I can't imagine paying tens of thousands of pounds a year for the privilege of that type of education, and my optimism does tend to go to that sort of informal, online, high availability of alternative forms of learning that I mean, a lot of people are doing all right and not bothering. There's still education, but you don't necessarily have to do the establishment thing. Okay, but at the same time, maybe that's making me reject the whole thing out of hand, when actually a lot of money, a lot of time, and there's something to be taken. They're sort of the oldest institutions in the world, really, unless you think, beyond the Catholic Church or something like that. Like a university is hundreds of years old, where, even a royal family is not that old sometimes,
However, may I offer as a counterpoint to yours that if you hadn't gone to that university and had that education, you may still be sitting in awe of it, and therefore in awe of many other things that are bullshit. I think the very fact of getting an education opens your eyes, reduces your Dunning-Kruger effect, makes you sort of go, do you know what? Yeah, you are very calm. I mean, I've got one of my cousin who passed away. He was somebody who didn't go to university, and he always, if somebody came and said they were a lawyer or something, he always had this degree of being impressed by them. I was like, stop being impressed by people. Just because they went to university does not make them clever or better than you. It just means that they've had this experience that you haven't. But that's what I mean. I think Nick and I were talking about this the other day. A lot of what you learn at university has got nothing to do with the subject. Nothing. It's just you're exposing yourself to different worlds, different people that you wouldn't have otherwise encountered. Like him coming from Arnold, me coming from, sort of I could have stayed in my Brighton bubble, whatever. But, that sort of exposing or having the curiosity to go to university, it's not about, I think the degree and what you get taught and the education structure is a fraction of it. Personally.
Okay, yeah. I mean, to take it back to the Zoomers and the Millennials, it's like they have got a lot more skin in the game when it comes to that formal education. So I think what we see is they're not going to university and drinking every night and spending a lot, because and I think that level of anxiety and stress that the younger generations are feeling about not getting that stamp of approval from that institution. And I know that Sharon sees this, these kids are just they absolutely freak out over and they're sort of at the same time there's this strange way in which they're kind of expecting a service, and they're expecting to be sort of given this thing. So there's this weird situation where there's this absolute heightened anxiety about if you mess this up, then that's debt for your entire life, and if you didn't even get the degree, then it's not even going to get you into the job that you want. So you see the millennial generation, I think, has suffered the most from that that thing where it's like we've got to go to university and it's going to cost us more than it's cost any other generation, or well, certainly this country, since thanks to neoliberal capitalism, it's gone insane. But I feel like maybe the Zoomers are being a bit smarter about that, how to approach that kind of thing. And I mean, based on what, I'm not sure, but I feel like maybe they're not just jumping straight into I'm going to study media studies and get into 70 grand of debt and drink all day. It's a lot more sort of like focused and about the education, but I think a lot more stressful and a lot more feels like it's riding on it for that.
I also think that, like as you say, the circumstances are changed for them, so they know that this, they're being a working class kid going to university in London, you still got absolutely no chance of buying a house. So if you remove these things that we might have been speaking about, like I'm going to get a job, then I'm going to get a mortgage, I'm going to get on the property ladder. If the property ladder isn't an option anymore, then you're going to look. And maybe you can be a bit more, you're going to look at different things and care about different things. And so, there are, so that neoliberalism 100%, must have an effect as well on the why they're the way they are. Because there's, I think it's a bad thing that's had a positive, like the reaction to it has potentially given us loads more progress.
Yes, let's. I hope so. And I think like once those younger people do get into positions of authority and start coming up through the power chain, hopefully we sort of see a bit of a pullback from this capitalist nightmare we're living in right now. But I don't know, like it would be nice to see something like that. And like so I do have some optimism for that. So like I watch the streamers. I go on TikTok. I want to know what's going on. I am genuinely like always curious about like how the young, what they're listening to, what they're looking at, and I'm always sort of fascinated by the complexity of pop music these days. The absolute sort of breathless progression of you can't just like play 4 bars of intro anymore. It's got to go through like 7 seasons of color like within 2 minutes, and like just to even be anything. But I think that the sort of the young people's like tolerance for complexity and information chaos and just like stuff coming in, just being able to process and categorize that information is I find it quite astonishing and quite sort of inspiring. But I gravitate towards that because that's something about myself that I know I kind of gravitate towards complicated things, and now I'm sort of seeing this generation, I'm seeing that aspect of their approach to life that makes me go, they're sort of like me. I always kind of feel like I always feel an affinity for them in that way, but I don't know, but we sort of gravitate to the things that we want to see, and different people are going to look at it in different ways, but
you've reminded me about some user research I did like 15 years ago when the web was much younger and had much less going on, and it was with people who were like 12 to 15, and if then what I thought was a horrific design that was really chaotic and messy and had like way too much going on, that's what they loved and that's what they wanted. So perhaps what's happening now is that these young brains that have got loads of space to process more stuff suddenly have more stuff than they've ever had. Maybe that's one of the factors that I have, which goes along with what you're saying. It's like suddenly we're optimized, like the information available and the format it's available in is optimized for teenage brains, accidentally, who can just cope with it all in a way that as you're worrying about what's for breakfast, what we've got to cook for breakfast and what we're going to have for tea tomorrow, and have we paid that bill, and is there something, you're like, oh, too much, I can't cope. They're like, yeah, world, have it.
And what's
so yeah.
It's interesting because, like, I mean, we you know, we haven't even touched on like the well, we have maybe a little bit, but the whole Instagram, like, teenage girls, the sort of like the mental health issues, you know, teenagers in general, like the mental health struggles that teenagers are. You know, cyberbullying. That's not even, you know, that's kind of quite a mature thing, but it's that I think that they have things that are normal to them are just sort of beyond. We can't even see them. We don't even know about them, and it's how can we even help them when we just aren't even seeing it. Like, to imagine, like, if like 10% of your life, or I don't know, like 20% of your life was lockdown. Like, how does that affect your worldview? It's like all this stuff that to us is these sort of strange chaotic events coming in at the back. It's just like, if that's your, you know, formative years, what does that do? It's
I don't know. I think we've got a lot of it's not just teen. I just think there's loads of processing from the pandemic specifically, that we're not near done. You know, there's babies that are we've got a friend who's got a 3-year-old now who was a proper baby in proper lockdown. And, you know, the first time, we were the first people outside of his family he saw for about 6 months. He saw Nick with his giant beard and just screamed. And he still likes to keep himself to himself. And you're thinking whether, you know, now it's like, is that his personality, or is it because
trauma?
That was his, you know, like, well, I don't think he would perceive it as trauma. You know, it's just that sort of like had a very restricted circle in those formative moments. Like, how does that affect you? And yeah, I think what you're talking about, the cyberbullying and all that, we haven't even touched upon, is going back to my 19-year-old young woman trying to deal with sex education in 2022, when people are using the accessibility of porn as an educational tool, and the trauma that's placing on people. Like, you know, there is a lot of danger. You know, if anything, the best thing we can teach. Well, this is not about Zoomers, though, because when you say young people, it's such a broad stroke, and I don't necessarily see myself as an old person. So it's like, every time you've said young people, I'm like a little bit twitchy. But, you know, there's like preschoolers, schoolers, teenagers, you know, and then these kind of late 20s. I mean, that's what Zoomers are now, aren't they? Or
they're teenagers, early.
Are they teenagers? Okay.
Late teens, I think.
They've got a lot going on, and you know, I think they've got to be serious.
Yeah.
Otherwise, their adulthood is going to be an absolute nightmare of climate change ravaged Earth.
So there's a lot of, and that's why, like, so many, like, a lot of them are going into that sort of either the sort of, you know, eco stuff or politics. I think they're kind of looking at it seriously in a way that we never would have, because especially like in the sort of post, you know, Trump era, where clearly you don't have to know what you're talking about to be a politician. Like, all these things that, you know, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, I think.
It is. But I read a wonderful article the other day, New York Times maybe, or Guardian, one of those two. Those are my news sources. And it was about climate positivity and optimism, and it had just all these influencers going, you know, we cannot doom spread. We have to speak in sort of, we have to give people positive things that they can do and keep people upbeat. And so there are loads of examples of all these youngsters, some of them very young, just being, you know, being Insta influencers, not pouting with the latest thing, but like showing people how to make cheese out of cashew nuts and what have you. Whether that's the ultimate example of climate activism, I don't know, but that's the one that came into my head. But you know what I mean? It's like just there's people doing stuff. It's like woo.
It's not like it's easy to get fixated on the more toxic aspects of society, but most people are pretty good, and most people on the internet are trying to do. Most people. There's a vocal, loud majority that are making the world seem terrible, but actually most people are just trying to do the right thing and trying to do well, and that means, a lot of the perspectives we've been exploring are just sort of like baked into people's life decisions at a young age now, and that is encouraging. And also, I want to link to the Kurzgesagt video about climate change as well, so I'm going to put that in the link. But we're going to finish up now with some credits. All right, thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, go to crampodcast.com. You can find us on Twitter. Where can people... Well, you can find me at Michael Forrest on Twitter. Where can they find you, Ivanka?
You can find me, or try and find me at Ivanka on Twitter.
Try. And come and check out mysquares.tv, check out Restaurants Brighton, and also check out our new podcast, canyousee-my-screen-podcast.com. We did a wonderful interview last week with Rabbi David Paskin about overcoming mediocrity in our video calls and things like that, and he showed us some cool tech stuff, and just philosophically it was very rewarding. So just come and see that, canyousee-my-screen-podcast.com. And that's that, which I announced on the podcast as canyousee-my-screen.com, which is not there yet. So there we go. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye 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 bye.